Chapter 2 The Wonderland Gallop. Nancy tried not to show her fear, but she could tell from the looks on their faces that the two oncoming crooks were deadly serious. If they could not scare her off, the bigger one was ready to use force. Should she stand her ground or run? Nancy's heart was pounding, and her throat suddenly felt dry. If she stayed, she might be hurt. But to give up now meant the Tromblets would lose all their money and have to return to Switzerland, their American vacation ruined by these vicious, unfeeling criminals. If only help would come. Nancy bit her lip to keep from trembling and decided to stall for time, at least for a few moments longer. Suddenly, the shrill blast of a police whistle split the air. Then came the faint sound of George's voice calling, "We're coming, Nancy!" The two older members of the pickpocket gang skidded to a halt only a second before they would have reached Nancy, glanced over their shoulders toward the sound of the whistle. The burly crook's face twisted with rage as he saw himself lose both his loot and a chance for revenge. Then he and his scrawny companion turned and fled. Nancy boldly reached out and grabbed the red-shirted youth's forearm. "See how your pals have deserted you?" she exclaimed scornfully. "Better give up that money you stole while you still have a chance." The young crook wavered, his pale face and oozed perspiration. With an oath, he jerked free of Nancy's grasp. At the same time, he grabbed a wad of bills from his pocket and tossed them into the air. Then he, too, ran and turned and ran. George and the park policeman reached the scene within moments. "Oh, Nancy! Thank goodness we got here in time," George said breathlessly. The officer didn't even stop. He just pounded on in pursuit of the fleeing crooks. Meanwhile, the breeze was scattering the money. Nancy and George were hastily collecting it when the Trompels, Bess, and the three Custer children came hurrying up. Everyone joined in the scramble, and soon they had retrieved all the money. "Better count it," Nancy advised Conrad Tromble. Trudy was crying quietly, but this time the tears were of relief. "Oh, Miss Drew, you're an angel! How can we ever thank you enough? The money is all here," Conrad told his wife with a happy smile. Then he took Nancy's hand earnestly. "God bless you, Miss Drew, and all the rest of you, my friends. Trudy and I are more grateful than we can say. You cannot imagine how bad we felt when it seemed we would have to go back home at once without seeing your country. But now we will enjoy our American tour more than ever." The Tromplets wanted to reward the girls and their small companions, but Nancy, Bess, and George would not hear of it. "We just want you to have a good vacation," Bess said, dimpling into her irresistible round-cheeked smile. The young couple thought they should wait at the scene until the officer returned. If the police need my testimony for any reason, they know where to reach me," Nancy told the Tromplets. The three girls took the Custer children and walked onto the carousel. Its gay music filled the air. The three children were jumping up and down in their eagerness to ride the merry-go-round. Just as they reached the carousel stopped. Gary ran forward, shouting, "I want the black horse!" Janet and Billy also found steeds to their liking. Bess and George helped the two little ones on while Nancy bought the tickets. Then the three teenagers went over to the park bench facing the merry-go-round and sat down to watch as it started up again. The carousel was certainly a beauty, with flashing mirrors and gilt cupids and other ornate decorations. Its name, Wonderland Gallop, was painted on the metal canopy in fancy red and gold letters. The horses looked spirited and realistic and were beautifully painted. Golly, I remember how much I loved to ride them, Bess reminisced. You did too, Nancy. So did I, George put in with a laugh, but my favorite ride was always the roller coaster. While her chums were talking, Nancy was watching the operator of the merry-go-round. A dark-haired man with a lined face and a mustache. He looked about 50 years old. He had a tow-headed young assistant who collected the tickets and helped the children off the horses when the ride was over. The older man left his assistant in charge and began walking toward a refreshment stand. Nancy intercepted him and introduced herself. You're the owner of the carousel, Mr.
Novak, he said. Leo Novak. Yes, I'm the owner. What can I do for you?
Nancy explained that she had been challenged by a reporter to find out why the carousel turned on so spookily at night of its own accord. Can you suggest any possible cause? Leo Novak shook his head.
Beats me. The whole thing's weird. I've checked over the monitor, the operating machinery, everything. I can't find anything out of order.
Could someone just be playing a prank?
Novak shrugged. Search me, it's possible, I suppose, but don't ask me who or how.
Nancy frowned thoughtfully. Mr. Novak, you just moved the carousel back to this park recently, didn't you?
That's right. The Wonderland Gallop used to run right here at Riverside Park up till about 8 years ago. Then Mr. Ogden, I guess, the first owner, moved it to another park out in the Midwest.
Were you with the carousel then?
Yep. I worked for Mr. Ogden for a long time. When he died, I brought it.
Why did you move it back here?
Oh, the place where we were was getting pretty run down and seedy. Business was falling off, so I decided it was time to find a better location. Besides, I always liked the River Heights.
Do you think anything could have happened to the operating machinery, or anyone could have tampered with it while the carousel was being moved?
Nancy probed persistently. Nah. Anyhow, like I say, I checked the whole setup when it started acting funny, and I couldn't find any bugs.
Novak spread his hands helplessly.
Just one of those crazy things, I guess.
How strange.
Nancy smiled.
Well, thank you for your help, Mr. Novak.
Anytime, Miss Drew, and good luck with your spook hunting.
Nancy rejoined Bess and George and the children, and they reassumed their rabble through the park. After sampling the monster, the dodgems, the Ferris wheel, the log jam, and then, much to the delight of the three children clusters, the haunted house. George looked at the other two teenagers and sighed.
Wow, I give up. I'm bushed.
Anyhow, her cousin Bess pointed out, it's time for dinner.
As Nancy and George laughed, the plump girl, who was often teased about her appetite, blushed but chuckled good-naturedly. Well, it is. And remember, we have to cook it on a houseboat. Bess and George's uncle, Mr. Cluster, had rented the houseboat during his vacation from his office job and had come downriver on it with his family to visit their relatives in River Heights. Tonight, Bess and George were to stay with the 3 children on the boat while their parents dined with the Fanes and the Marvins. Come on, Nancy. You've got to see the boat to believe it. It's such fun to live on, George said.
You bet, little Janet chimed in. I wish we could live on it all the time. Yeah, it's great,
said her brother Gary added. While they chatted, the group was walking out of the amusement ride area and through the adjoining woodland on their way to the marina at the edge of the Riverside Park. As they approached the dock in the late afternoon sunshine, Janet burst out,
Look, there's someone on our boat. It's a man.
Wide-eyed, the girls saw a figure silhouette against the lowered sun. As they watched, he disappeared on the other side of the houseboat. I'll go for help, Bess said nervously. All right. And you 3 stay here, please. All right. And you 3 stay here, please, while George and I see what's going on, Nancy told the Clusters. She picked up a small, hefty rock, while George found a broken tree branch. Determinedly, the 2 girls began to walk out on the dock toward the houseboat, their hearts pounding. Chapter 3. Night Watch. The deck of the houseboat lay almost on a level with the dock. As they reached the craft, George shot a quizzical glance at Nancy, who put a finger to her lips. Then both of them stepped aboard. With her lips close to George's ear, Nancy whispered that she would tiptoe around the bow of the boat, while George went around the stern. That way, she added. We'll close in on him from 2 directions at once, and he won't be able to deal with both of us. Nancy broke off with a start as a masculine voice shouted, Boo! George screamed and clutched her friend, and Nancy whirled around. Both girls shrieked, Ned! At the sight of a tall, husky young man in a western shirt and jeans, who had just leapt out at them from a corner of the cabin. He was Nancy's boyfriend, Ned Nickerson. Seeing how startled the girls were, he put an arm around each of them reassuringly and apologized. Sorry, I didn't really mean to scare you out of your wits. I didn't mean to scare the wits out of you. He noticed the rock and the tree branch they were clutching. Ned chuckled. I guess I'm the one who should have been scared. It might have been lights out if I'd gotten beamed with one of those. When he had met the 3 little Cluster children, and he and Nancy had been shown all over the houseboat, Ned said, Actually, I didn't just come down here to play boogeyman, Nancy. I went to your house first, and Hannah said I might find you here, at the marina. Bess, who had happily rejoined her friends after seeing who the intruder was, cut in.
Well, now that you're here, you can stay and have dinner with us.
Ned, who had brown eyes and wavy dark hair, replied with his usual ready smile. It's good of you to invite me after I played such a trick, but I really came to ask Nancy if she could switch our date from tomorrow to tonight. Turning to his friend, he added, "You see, I have to make a quick trip back to Emerson College to straighten out my program for the fall semester. There's been a computer mix-up on the courses I signed up for."
"Oh, tonight will be fine, Ned," Nancy told him.
"Well, you two are still welcome to stay," George said with a mischievous grin. "But if I were you, Nancy, I wouldn't." Even Bess burst out laughing.
"Neither would I, if you want the truth, especially because I know what we'll be cooking tonight."
"I made reservations at Rustler's Inn," Ned said when the laughter died down.
"But if—" "Say no more," Nancy interrupted hastily. "Just lead the way." In his own car, Ned trailed Nancy back to the Drew house so she could change.
"Gee, you look great just as you are, Nancy," he protested as she started upstairs. "Everyone goes to the Rustler's Inn in jeans."
Check. I know, but I'd like to get a little more Western looking. Kind of also check. I feel like, Western turtleneck, sure. Anyway. Nancy responded with a chuckle. "And I want to freshen up a bit, too." A short time later, having changed into a blue and white checkered shirt and tied a red bandana around her neck, Nancy picked up her small shoulder bag and announced, "Ta-da! I'm ready." Ned looked over her approachingly and grinned. "Guess I should have worn my Western boots." At the inn, Ned looked over her approvingly and grinned.
"I guess I should have worn my Western boots."
At the inn, over thick, sizzling steaks, Nancy told Ned how reporter Rick Jason had challenged her to solve the mystery of the haunted carousel.
I read about that in the newspaper," Ned murmured, taking a forkful of crisp green salad. "There must be a perfectly natural explanation,
and I intend to find it," Nancy declared. "But first, I'd like to see it happen with my own eyes."
"Do you have a plan?"
"Well, I thought I might keep watch on the park tonight."
"What if nothing happens?" Ned asked. "The carousel doesn't go into its spooky routine every night, does it?"
"No, you're right," Nancy admitted. "Unless I'm lucky, I may have to stake out the park several nights in a row." "You wouldn't want to join me on watch tonight, by any chance?"
"Wild horses couldn't keep me away. What's more, I want you to promise me something."
"What's that?" Nancy's blue eyes twinkled.
"That you'll never go there too late at night. Unless I'm in River Heights so I can go with you," Ned said earnestly. "Okay?"
"Well, perhaps you're right," Nancy said, as they started their apple pie and coffee. Ned didn't realize that she had actually promised nothing. Later, after deciding on the best time to arrive at Riverside Park, Ned and Nancy left the restaurant and drove to a movie theater that was showing a horror film they had chosen to see. It had gotten rave reviews and a spine-chilling thriller. 2 hours later, when the movie ended,
They walked out of the theater laughing. It wasn't really very scary. Did you think, Ned? Nope. Out of 2 hours playing time, there were about 2 minutes of shock. The rest was silly. Laughing, they linked arms and sauntered to Ned's car. I'd like to go home first and tell Dad where we're going, Nancy said, and maybe pick up a sweater too. Shall I bring one of Dad's for you to wear, Ned? Thanks, but I have one in the car. Nancy. It might be a good idea to take along some night glasses, though. We can pick them up at my house on our way to the park. You mean binoculars? Right. Mine are for low light and night surveillance. They're used by Navy and Coast Guard, Ned replied. Carson Drew was reading in his usual comfortable armchair in the living room when they arrived. Well, good to see you, Ned. Enjoy the movie, honey? He gave Nancy a hug. Mildly, Dad, Nancy said, smiling at Ned. Then she told her father about the latest mystery she had undertaken to solve. So if it's okay with you, Ned and I are going to the park tonight to see if the carousel goes on again when everything's dark. The distinguished attorney had long since learned to trust his daughter's good judgment and quick-witted ability to deal with emergencies. Excuse me. Very well, he nodded. If Ned's with you, I don't worry. But you two be careful. Nancy changed into a pair of sturdy casual shoes, then grabbed a sweater and an extra flashlight, and left the house with Ned. The two stopped at his house to pick up these special binoculars before driving into the park. It was about 10 minutes to 11 when they reached their destination. I think we'd better park the car in the public parking lot near the marina and walk back, Ned remarked. What do you think, Nancy? Good idea. It'll be less conspicuous there after the park closes. Closing time for the amusement area of Riverside Park was 11 o'clock. Customers were drifting out as Nancy and Ned approached, and the rides were shutting down one by one. The amusement section was fenced off from the rest of the wooded park by a pipe and chain barrier. Ned and Nancy stayed outside this barrier and made their way along the darkened footpath to a clump of trees and shrubbery that afforded a clear view of the carousel. Let's wait here, Nancy suggested. The carousel was situated near the side of the park that overlooked the riverbank. Its lights were still on as the teenage sleuth and her companion made themselves comfortable in the hiding place she had chosen. The proprietor was busy counting his receipts for the evening, while his young assistant swept the platform and picked up candy wrappers and other debris with a spike. Debris? Maybe? I don't know. Nancy lounged on the grass, and Ned leaned against a tree trunk while the amusement park area grow dark as the lights were turned off one by one. Meanwhile, the carousel operator's young assistant finished his chores, called goodnight to his boss, and left the park. A few minutes later, Leo Novak turned off the merry-go-round lights, and the two watchers saw him trudge off toward his trailer, which was parked near a few other vans and campers in which lived other park concessionaries. Finally, all was dark. How long do you want to wait, Nancy? Ned found himself speaking in a hushed voice. I think if nothing has happened by, say, 1:30, we may as well leave. From what I've heard and read in the news reports, the carousel has never started up later than that. They sat quietly and watched and waited. It was a lovely starlight night, and the crickets chirped very peaceful. Nancy's eyelids grew heavier and minute by minute and began to close. Suddenly, Ned nudged her awake. "Did you see something move over there?" he whispered, reaching for his binoculars. Nancy's eyes widened quickly. "Yes! Look, Ned!" Even without the glasses, she could make out two dark figures heading toward the carousel. They stepped on the outer edge of the merry-go-round, and Nancy saw them dimly silhouetted by a small glow of light, as if a flashlight had been turned on. After pausing for a moment, they began moving from horse to horse. "What the dickens are they up to?" Ned grumbled. "It's hard to see with their backs turned." He handed the binoculars to Nancy. As she focused on the two intruders, they stopped and now appeared to be centering their entrance on one particular horse. An instant later, Nancy caught her breath as the lights of the carousel suddenly blazed on. Organ music churned loudly, and the merry-go-round began to revolve. Chapter 4. Danger in the Dark. Nancy and Ned gaped in amusement. The effect was almost as if the carousel had magically come alive in the middle of the night. "What happened?" Ned exclaimed. "Did those two spooks start it up?" "No, they weren't even near the controls. In fact, they almost fell off when the merry-go-round started turning. I think they were caught by surprise. And scared. Here, see for yourself, Ned." Nancy handed him the binoculars. By now, a few lights were coming on in the park trailers as the carousel music blared out through the night stillness. The two dark figures abruptly fled. "I'm going after them," Ned blurted. He sprang to his feet, leapt across the chain barrier enclosing the amusement park area, and headed in pursuit. Nancy followed close behind. The two mysterious intruders were running away from the carousel in the opposite direction from Ned and Nancy's stake-out position. So far, the only lights in the park were those turned on in the campers and trailers belonging to the concessionaires and the ride operators. Already the two fugitives were disappearing in the darkness. Nancy paused for a moment as Leo Novak came running up. Evidently, he had dressed in haste and had not even taken time to pull on a jacket or other top over his undershirt. He looked both startled and angry, but his eyes widened in surprise on seeing the pretty teenager. "Where did you come from?" he demanded. "A friend and I were keeping watch," she said briefly, "over there among the trees." "See anything?" "Yes, two men came up to the carousel." "Did they monkey with it?" "I don't think so. At least, not with the operating machinery. They seem to be interested in the horses, but you'd better make sure everything's all right." Without bothering to explain further, Nancy resumed running after Ned and the two intruders. Her last glimpse of the boy had been as he veered off to the left behind the Ferris wheel. But now he too was no longer in sight. From the direction Ned had been heading, Nancy guessed that his pursuit of the fugitives must have taken him between the video game arcade and the row of refreshment counters. She ran the same way. Beyond loomed an array of booths, stands, and rides that made up a gaudy heart of the park's midway. Just now they were a maze of gloom and shadow. Where had Ned gone? Nancy could hear running footsteps somewhere in the distance, but it was hard to judge the exact direction the sound was coming from. She could only plunge forward at random, zigzagging among the concessions, hoping to catch a glimpse of her vanished friend. At first, she had been reluctant to call out his name for fearing of alerting the sinister prowlers. But as her worries grew for his safety, Nancy threw caution to the wind and shouted, "Ned? Ned, can you hear me? Where are you?" Her heart flew into her mouth as she rounded the corner of the Shutter souvenir stand and almost stumbled over something lying on the ground. The obstacle, barely visible in semi-darkness, felt bulky enough to be a human form. At that moment, someone switched on the overhead lights of the midway. Nancy gasped in fear as she saw the figure at her feet. It was Ned, sprawled motionless on the ground. "Oh, Ned! Ned!" she cried, dropping to one knee. "What happened? Are you all right?" She turned him over and touched his forehead and cheek. He stirred, and his eyes opened with a faint groan. Ned struggled to gain his feet. "Wow," he muttered, rubbing the back of his head. "Someone must have conked me." "Maybe you'd better rest a while," Nancy urged anxiously. Ned gave her a quick hug and a sheepish grin. "Don't worry, I'm okay," he assured her. "I don't think I was out more than a few seconds." In any case, further pursuit seemed useless. After a quick circuit of the amusement park area, the couple gave up their chase of the two intruders and returned to Ned's car. Next morning, the young sleuth slept later than usual. When she came downstairs, a copy of the River Heights News was lying on the sofa. Nancy's eye was caught by her own picture on the front page. The accompanying story told how the famous girl detective had accepted the newspaper's challenge to solve the mystery of the haunted carousel. "Oh, you've seen it already. I was going to show it to you, Nancy." Hannah Gruen, the Drews' motherly housekeeper, came into the living room from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, and saw the teenager reading the newspaper article. "Yes. My, it really puts me on the spot," Nancy commented ruefully. "In more ways than one," said Hannah. "Our phone's been ringing all morning. Thank goodness it didn't wake you. Who's calling? My goodness, I don't know. Some were cranks, I guess. Everybody wants to tell you how to solve the carousel mystery. Hannah, you should have put it on the answering machine." "That's just what I finally did, dear. Oh, wait a minute," the housekeeper added. "There was one sensible call. A girl who gave her name, Joy Trent. She wants you to solve a private mystery for her." Just then there was a knock on the front screen door, and a familiar voice called in, "Nancy, it's me, Bess." Oh, just a minute, Nancy said, getting up and going to the door. The pretty girl looked bright-eyed and eager as she accompanied Nancy into the living room of the front hall. What's going on? She inquired keenly. I tried to call this morning, but I kept getting busy signals. I couldn't get through. So I came over to invite you to a cookout at my place tonight. Hello, Mrs. Gruen. Bess finished in a rush. How would you two like some breakfast? The housekeeper responded with a twinkle. Bess? Nancy? Sounds good to me. Bess laughed. Actually, I did have a nibble when I first got up, but that was quite a while ago. Nancy turned to the housekeeper. Never mind, Hannah. We'll just pop into the kitchen and get something for ourselves. After making themselves a leisurely breakfast of waffles with blueberry syrup, that exists, apparently, and sausages and coffee, Bess and Nancy washed the dishes and made the kitchen tidy again. Bess, how would you like to come with me to the amusement park? How would you like to come to the amusement park with me? Nancy asked as she took off the apron she had donned, I think, for their dishwashing chore. We won't be long, then I'll drive you home. Sure, great! On the way, Nancy told Bess of her and Ned's adventure in the park the night before last. Oh, golly, is Ned okay? Bess inquired sympathetically. He seemed to be, thank heavens. Luckily, he was only hit hard enough to stun him. Honestly, Nancy, do you get into the wildest adventures? The teenage sleuth chuckled. Not on purpose, believe me. But at least that's better than getting bored, isn't it? Anyhow, that's why I'm going to the park. I'd like to see if I can find out what those two sneaks were doing on the carousel last night. As noontime neared, the limited parking space outside the amusement park entrance was already filling up with cars, so Nancy turned into the nearby marina lot instead, as Ned had done the night before. Then she and Bess headed back on foot to the carousel. Soon after they had entered the amusement ride area, Bess nudged her companion and pointed off to the right. A park policeman was waving at them. He's the one who went after those pickpockets yesterday, the plump girl explained. Yes, his name's Officer Doyle, Nancy murmured. I wonder what's up. He looks like he wants to talk to us. They met the policeman halfway. He was accompanied by a hard-jawed man in a gray suit whom Nancy had never seen before. Say, you were mighty lucky yesterday, Nancy, Officer Doyle greeted the teenager. Maybe you didn't realize it, but when you tangled with those crooks here in the park, you were really flirting with danger. She does that a lot. Actually, that would make a great title for a book. Who am I kidding? It probably already is the title of a book. Flirting with Danger. There's no way they didn't use that title in the 80s series? The one where Nancy's having romantic drama.